Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to Readings in the Theater with the Berea Bookfest. Our first reader today is going to be Brandon Thompson. So Brandon Thompson is a poet, a scholar, a musician and lover of music, and a Buddhist practitioner and teacher. He has been a faculty member at Sophia University's Global Master's Program for nearly a decade. He considers himself a teacher with a calling, and especially resonates with the transformative learning modalities associated with transpersonal psychology. Brandon has been a student of Mahayana Buddhism since 1999 and has taught in this tradition since taking his Bodhisattva vow in the summer of 2007. He finds his home practices in Lojong, mind training, and Tonglen, sending and taking meditation, first prescribed by the Buddhist sage Shantideva in the 8th century. I probably butchered that name, sorry. Brandon has published 3 collections of ecstatic poetry. His second book, From the Back of a Thirsty Camel, was applauded by Buddhist psychotherapist and author John Wellwood as a beautiful collection of ecstatic poetry by a genuine seeker and a powerful poet. Brandon regularly facilitates ecstatic poetry workshops across the United States. His current work involves bringing ecstatic poetry more fully into his life and into the world. Through his publications, scholarly writing, teaching, and workshops, Brandon is seeking to share the transformative power of ecstatic poetry with others, and to further define and engage the power of this ancient contemplative art form. So if we could please give a round of applause.
That was not easy for you, and I appreciate you, those words. Hello? Okay.
You don't need it.
No, you're right. Good morning. So thank you for coming, for vacating your tables, those of you who did, to come and hear me talk for a moment. I appreciate it very much. I'm Brandon. Thanks, John, for the introduction. I can tell you a lot about myself, but I'd rather talk about poetry. I have tried a few things at least with my life, and you know, Joseph Campbell is well known for saying, you see it on the bumper stickers, he says, follow your bliss. That's kind of become a little bit kitschy when you see it, you know, on the bumper stickers, but what he meant when he said that was, find your calling, find what aligns you, and then go after it. And when you do, if you're really aligned with it, if it's really your bliss, then doors will start to open, and that's what's happening for me in my life, I sincerely think. So I feel like I've found my bliss, and I kind of shout that from the mountaintops because it was a long road. There's a long road back there. I have a few of my poems that I'd like to share, but before I do, I want to talk a little bit about ecstatic poetry. You know, we in the West, we're tempered in more Western ideas of poetry. And I want to say right off the bat that I'm no scholar of poetry. I love ecstatic poetry. I think I'm on the road to becoming an ecstatic poetic scholar. I don't even really know if I'm there yet. I just know that I love it. I know it makes the most sense to me. And I know that that's kind of the form of writing that comes out of me when I write. So the original writers of ecstatic poetry were Rumi and Hafiz, the Persian writers from the 13th century, Hafiz the 14th century. And these guys and all the poets since then they've used writing in a little bit of a different way. They've used writing as it's closer to like a spiritual practice, like meditation, or you know, the whirling dervishes, or religious experience is something that ecstatic poetry can be compared to. I've done a lot of work with a couple poet partners that I've been working with for lots of years. I've done a lot of work to kind of put a pin on the map of the poetic terrain that can identify right where ecstatic poetry is and what an ecstatic poem does and what an ecstatic poem feels like. And so I've sat in front of lots of groups now for many years. I teach ecstatic poetry to people who, for whatever reason, they must not like see my picture first or something, for whatever reason want to come and hear ecstatic poetry. In fact, a little over a week from now, I'm going to California to present an ecstatic poetry evening lecture at one of the biggest bookshops in San Francisco, so I'm super excited about that. So what is ecstatic poetry? We have a vision. It goes like this. Ecstatic poetry is a devotional practice that seeks to connect both poet and reader to their innate longing for their essence. There are like beats there. Practice, devotion, yeah? Connection to something, connection. We were sure that this was a part of it. Longing, you know, this innate, inborn longing for that. For what, right? For what? The word we're using is essence. We could have used a word like God. Essence felt a little more, right? To us. And the last thing I'll say on that is, thanks for hearing all that. I'm working really hard right now to develop really specific, pointed teaching modalities that can bring ecstatic poetry out of you, out of us. This is part of the work that I'm trying to bring into the world today. So I have a few poems that I'll read. I want to start with Rumi. This is obviously not my book. This is The Soul of Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks. This is a real central text for me in my studies. I could read you 100 awesome poems. I've selected one, and it's very brief. Rumi again lived in the 13th century in present day in the Persian Empire. He was a Sufi, which is Sufism is the mystical branch of the Islam faith. He was a whirling dervish. He was a drunken madman, and I think he was a sage. The world, a lot of the world agrees, I think. So when I read these words, and maybe these other words, but they're mine, so maybe not quite so much as this one, but when I read these words, I invite you, to consider this idea of devotional practice, connection to something, longing, and essence. Okay. Poets talk a lot. Some of us, I guess. This is a poem by Rumi called The Level of Words. God has said, "The images that come with human language do not correspond to me, but those who love words must use them to come near. Just remember, it's like saying of the king, he is not a weaver. Is that praise? Whatever such a statement is, words are on that level of God knowing." This is my second book from the back of the Thirsty Camel I presented from this last year. I have 2 new ones this year. This book is the piece of art that means the most to me. This is my real stepping out into the world as a poet in this form. Again, there's a whole lot I could read. I'm just going to read a couple, very brief. There are quite a few different sections. The work in this book is diverse. These are my poems about what poetry is. Specifically, my poems about what ecstatic poetry is. The first one's called Instruction. To be a poet, don't get caught up in trying to say something. Instead, remember, God is always speaking, though it is not with your ears that you will hear his voice. The second one is called A Secret. Let me tell you a secret. Poetry is born from that ache in your chest. It might feel like a question, but the truth is, it's the answer. I did a collaboration with a fellow artist. I really want to give him a shout. His name's Jesse Glynn. He's a local guy. He's an awesome human being, a good friend, and a badass painter. He's a great painter. Visually, I am completely stunted. I cannot draw or paint at all. I wish I could. So this is a collaboration we call Ecstatic Counselors. He painted, I wrote. Yeah? So I wish this will be on YouTube, I wish the folks on YouTube could see this amazing painting. Sorry, Jesse. He did this beautiful painting called Night Swimming. It makes me long for love. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's 2 people swimming under the moonlit night in a body of water. And I wrote, "It was midnight when we slipped like daring dreamers into the waters half lit by moonlight. And in that moment, the cathedrals of my heart filled with the following certainties. Poets have written of the moon, but I know of no poet who could write about us. Painters have painted in all the colors of bliss, but I'd never seen a painting that could assume to move me like you did. What can I say about the type of love that I felt when I beheld you from below, enveloped in the illumined crown of night swimming? It was as if my soul fell in droplets of beaded water from your eyelashes and rejoined the cresting gems of moonlight that held us and bound us so tenderly together. I become mindful of the time, so briefly I'll read just one from my most recent book. This is called The Medicine is in the Poison. John mentioned that I'm a Buddhist teacher and practitioner. I have been for a decade now. This is my 10-year anniversary as a Bodhisattva vow. This book is, I would certainly call it ecstatic poetry, but it's another stepping out. This is my stepping out as a Buddhist teacher in the literary world. This is a book that's not, actually it's not for everybody. I don't think it's a book that's of poems that are specifically pointed at a Buddhist teaching, a system of Buddhist teaching called Lojong, which means mind training in Tibetan. The Lojong teachings are a series of 59 teaching slogans. They have transformed my life. They are amazing rules to live by. They're not rules. They're amazing guidelines to consider. There's a Lojong slogan called "Refrain from Outrageous Action." And I wrote this poem based on that Lojong slogan, and it's the most political thing that I've written as an ecstatic poet. This poem also goes by the title, The Good Fight. Your life is filled with those who fight the good fight. You know just who they are. Once they caught a glimpse of a better way and have been chasing it ever since, while making quite a scene on their great crusade of selflessness. Perhaps you're even one of them. But the teachings suggest that selfless action is less cacophonous and is more effective when it appears in quieter corners of our tender, precious lives. If your heart is open and committed to loving kindness, accept this challenge. To witness the project that you've created, the one that turns good service into public exhibition. To bravely acknowledge your willing crucifixions and martyrdoms in the town square as subtly self-serving, not exactly what you had planned when you first set out on this quest. Perhaps seeing clearly will shake the foundation that you worked so hard to build. But once the flaming sword cuts through your misconceptions, you will see that there is a way to serve that doesn't begin with I. That's my anti-activism poem. Thank you so much.